I'm Kat and welcome to my channel, and today I want to talk about making this pair of cut-off jeans. Okay, so do you really need a whole video to talk about making cut-off jeans? The method is literally in the name. You get some jeans, you cut some off, cut-off jeans. Job's a good one. I thought it'd be interesting because I also did a little bit of work to put these contrast cuffs in a fabric, an orange and teal fabric that came in a skirt that I got from the charity shop. And here's a remaining section of that skirt just to give you an idea of the fabric, which I find very pretty, and I will keep the rest of the skirt for further uses when they occur to me. So yeah, as well as adding these contrast cuffs on the legs, I also went and put some patches over the back pockets, which is something I've done with a lot of pairs of jeans in the past, just to add a little bit of something interesting and some colour. So step one in making your jeans into cut-off jeans is to figure out where you want to cut them off. So put those jeans on, and then with tailor's chalk or a washable felt tip pen, just put a mark on each leg about where you think you want to have them cut off. So because for this I wanted to put a cuff on this, I sort of put the line a little bit higher than I think I would have. You know, I left in there what I thought for seam allowance, and then had a sort of idea of how thick I wanted the cuff to be. So how wide, sorry, not how thick. So I made my cut based on that. Once you've got your lines in, lay the jeans out flat and measure up from the hem to the lines, and just make sure that all the lines are in the right place and that they're not wildly off, so you're going to have wacky mismatched legs or wacky diagonal lines on your legs, unless that's what you're going for. Right, so you've got your markings, you've made sure that all your markings are at the same height from the hem and that they're all joined up. Draw the line where you're going to cut. Next step is to cut. Just chop the bottoms of those jeans off, save the denim for another day. I'm always putting holes in my jeans, so having a stash of denim in a colour, you know, in a washout that matches how washed out these are, is going to be very useful. For the next time I put a hole in these, I can use that to make a patch if I so wish. Okay, the next step is forming up the cuff. So if you are reclaiming the fabric from another garment, you'll want to figure out how best to do that. These cuffs here have an existing seam in that was part of the seam of the skirt, which they were. So I ripped it open at the sides, no, at the front and back seam, and so each one of these has a side seam still in it. So because the idea is to have cuffs that turn up, you want both sides to be the right side, which means that you need to get the width. You need to figure out the width of the cuff you want, then double it so that you can fold it over, and then add a seam allowance on either side. So it needs to be quite a bit wider than the final cuff. And because I ended up using a flat felled seam, which, just in case anyone's not familiar with that, the flat felled seam is the one that you see on jeans where you're seeing a double line of parallel stitches on a sort of fairly chunky seam there. So this one's like a regular seam, which is put two right sides together, sew on the back, and there you go, and you don't see any of the stitches. But then the one on the other side, usually on the inside of the jeans, which is going to be the more hard-wearing seam as your legs are rubbing together and stuff, that's going to be the flat felled seam, and that is one fabric comes over like that, the other fabric goes under like that, the two lock together, and then there's a run of stitches at each side of that lock. So a flat felled seam is what I decided to do on the cuffs, just so that all of the edges were enclosed, so that there wasn't a worry that when I turned the cuffs up, the seam would come flapping out, or so that there was a load of raw edges from the seam there rubbing around my knee. It was to keep everything tight and enclosed. So as well as knowing the widths of that you want your cuffs, and then, you know, doing the doubling and seam allowance, you're going to also want to know how far around those cuffs are. For me, I just cut a strip, pinned them on, and then figured out where to cut based on that. But if you are a little more planned than I am, you probably want to figure out the distance around and then add some seam allowance as well for that. Okay, you've got your cuff. You've got your cuff fabric, so you want to fold it in half with the wrong sides together and iron it flat, just to make it easier to work with. And then I also, on the non-folded side, on the open side, where it was wrong side together, the two edges, just did a quick stitch, quick baste up there, just to make sure that they stayed in place and that both sides stayed together where I wanted them. Okay. Next up, I laid the cuff material around the outside, the right side of the jeans, so that the cut edge of the jeans was pointing that way, and also the open edge of the cuffs was pointing that way, the bit that was going to be inside the seam. And I lapped them so that the jeans end was out a bit more, because that bit that was out is going to come back over in the flat felled seam. And then I pinned those together at the right place, and I left the open side open because my on the circular dimension I left the open side open of the cuffs because I knew I was going to hand stitch those in together. So with them laid out and pinned like that, I went through and sewed the cuffs onto the jeans and on what was going to be the inside of the flat felled seam. Having sewn those two pieces together effectively like that, I folded up and pressed up the raw edge of the bottom of the jeans over the raw edge of the cuffs material and pressed that up together. Then I folded the cuffs down to make the flat felled seam and pressed that again, and then went round and pinned it and made sure that it was all tucked in and right before sewing around at the point where the cuffs and the fold of the right side of the cuffs and the fold of the denim underneath were sat together. So while it is a flat felled seam which has two parallel lines of stitching, those parallel lines of stitching are visible only on the inside of the jeans, whereas on the top side there is just the one line visible, which is about a centimetre down from the top of the cuffs, which runs around there. So having gotten the cuffs on, the next thing that was to do was to fasten the two sides together. So there should be some fabric flapping around there, and obviously you want to, when you're doing the flat fell seam, to control that a certain amount so it doesn't get caught up. So I wanted there to be a split for half of the cuff, and then for it to be a continuous piece for half of it for the rest of it. And the reason is because, of course, when you turn it up, the thighs are a little chunkier than the rest of the legs, so I didn't want it to be straining at all, so it's got a bit of chance to flap. And also because I have proper, I was going to say capri pants, but they were actually pedal pushers according to the list of lengths. I have some proper pedal pushers that I bought which have that little detail of a little side vent, and I wanted to emulate that. So all of this was just done by hand, tucking it in, hand stitching it together to make first a seam there, and then to tuck in and sew down the raw edges to make the sides of the vent there. And that was pretty much that part of the process. So as for the other part, which is the decorated back pockets, that was a fairly simple one. All I needed there was some fabric which is pretty much the size of the pockets plus a seam allowance. And luckily the skirt that I bought had pockets of pretty much that exact size. Yeah, they were square pockets, whereas jeans pockets are a little bit more shield shaped. But the difference was so little that actually it made perfect sense just to take those square pockets and just fold the extra into the seam allowance, which is what I did. So I took the pockets and pinned them down on top of the jeans pocket. So this is not a replacement of the jeans pockets that are already on the garment. This is just appliquing on additional fabric to cover those. So yeah, I pinned them in place and then went around the outside of the pockets with embroidery floss, 2 strands of embroidery floss, 2 of 6, and went and did a blanket stitch all the way around the edge of the existing pocket to put the new pocket material on top. So, yeah, so I think the extra pockets bit just gives a little bit of colour to tie the top of the cut-offs into the bottom of the cut-offs. This pair of jeans was actually my least well-fitting pair of jeans, even out of the sacrificial jeans which weren't coming back into the cupboard without without me at least using them for sort of a certain amount of remake experimentation. So they're a little tight, but my hope is that maybe by next summer they'll be a little more wearable. As it is, the weather's turned, so I don't think I'm going to get much wear out of these this year. Yeah, so I had fun making them, and I was especially happy with that charity shop find of that skirt in a nice natural material. It's linen, in a pattern that was exactly in my colours that I like, but a summery take on them, you know, with a bit of a brighter orange and a light background. So I'm really happy with these, and hopefully next year I'll be wearing these guys all the time. We shall see. But until then, have a smashing day.